Some truths were never buried in graves. They were entombed in vaults, sealed behind signatures, and whispered in corridors where no sunlight reached. In the shadows between empires, files vanished, witnesses recanted, and history itself was redacted. From the frozen ridges of forgotten mountains to the marble catacombs beneath sanctuaries, something was being hidden. An unfinished equation, a broken oath, a weapon of silence. What began as a war between nations became a quiet battle for memory itself. Every flag that waved in victory concealed a ledger of names no one was meant to read, and every archive that survived the fire carried one page too many. The question is no longer what happened, but what was removed from the record, and why the silence surrounding it still feels heavier than the war that caused it. Some secrets die with soldiers. Others wait for us to start digging. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Aurora. In late April 1945, the northern ports of Germany were collapsing under the weight of Allied bombardment. Kiel, once the beating heart of the Kriegsmarine, was now a city of smouldering cranes and silent shipyards. Yet amidst the chaos, a final order moved through encrypted naval channels, an operation marked with a codename never before seen in surviving war records: Operation Aurora. Its mission details were restricted to Oberkommando der Marine, OKM, level Schwarz, accessible only to a handful of senior officers. What made this operation stand apart was its timing, initiated as Berlin itself fell into encirclement, and the strange classification attached to its cargo manifest: Sonderladung wissenschaftlich, non-fission priority. According to Kriegsmarine radio logs recovered after the war, the convoy consisted of 4 vessels: U-977B, U-6041, the trawler Brücke 4, and a disguised tanker registered under the name Nordstern. Departing Kiel harbour on the fog-covered morning of April 27th, they were reported to be carrying industrial equipment intended for transfer to Norway. Yet cross-referencing these dates with Allied reconnaissance shows no such convoy appearing on radar or sonar grids in the Skagerrak Strait. A surviving entry from the Nordstern's logbook, recovered from a Danish scrapyard in 1952, contains only one clear sentence: Aurora initiated. Cargo stable. No surface transmission permitted. The remainder of the page had been burned away. In 1946, British Naval Intelligence, then operating under the recently restructured Directorate of Naval Intelligence, DNI, began investigating rumours of missing German research shipments. Among these were references to an experimental propulsion program tied to Project Sonnenkraft. Translated loosely as Solar Force. Files recovered from Peenemünde indicate Sonnenkraft was not a weapons initiative, but an energy-based propulsion theory involving field oscillations and plasma containment, a precursor in principle to what modern physicists might call directed ion thrust. The program's chief engineer, Dr. Ernst Köhler, vanished after February 1945. Soviet occupation forces later listed him as deceased, presumed suicide, though no remains were ever found. It was only in 1954 that fragments of the Aurora narrative resurfaced, a declassified intercept by GCHQ once marked Ultra Black Nothorn revealed an encoded message intercepted from Murmansk on May 12, 1945, 2 weeks after Germany's official surrender. The transmission, sent via captured Kriegsmarine frequency, contained phrases matching the cipher group previously used by the U-977 command channel. The message's final line read, Phase 2 material secured. Destination undisclosed. The British analysts who decrypted it speculated the cargo had reached Soviet-controlled territory, though no direct evidence surfaced. By 1948, Soviet interest in advanced energy systems was accelerating. NKVD documentation from the Azama's 16-in archives, declassified briefly in the 1990s, contains several references to recovered axis mechanism, AURORA device, allegedly received from northern transport convoys. Witness accounts from Soviet technicians describe metallic canisters emitting residual heat despite being sealed and unpowered. One technician, later interviewed by defectors in the 1970s, recalled the label Siemens Sonnenkraft B12 etched on the casing. Within months, all who had contact with the materials were reassigned to research institutes in Sverdlovsk, or simply disappeared. Meanwhile, In the West, Operation Paperclip had already absorbed much of Germany's scientific elite, yet the Americans too seemed aware of AURORA, a 1947 memo from the newly formed CIA to the US Navy's Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, mentions concurrent German-Soviet retrievals in polar routes and requests immediate aerial reconnaissance of Jan Mayen Island. Declassified photographs show unusual heat signatures beneath the ice shelf, prompting temporary deployment of a US destroyer group under Commander James K. Halloran. The mission's outcome was never published, but Halloran's private diary, donated by his family in 1983, notes the recovery of non-standard metal alloys resembling titanium but bearing no known serial system. Halloran's entry ends abruptly with the words, "AURORA echoes confirmed." End contact. What makes AURORA particularly haunting is the silence surrounding it. After 1950, all references vanish from British and American archives. Soviet files containing mentions of the operation were sealed under Klasyfikacja Osobowej Ważności, the highest state secrecy classification. Yet traces continue to emerge through unrelated documents. A 1961 Royal Air Force field test in Norway describing electromagnetic disturbances across latitude 71°N, identical to readings recorded in 1945 when AURORA departed Kiel. The disturbances lasted precisely 11 minutes and were accompanied by shortwave bursts resembling wartime German signal modulation. By the 1970s, conspiracy among military historians grew around the theory that AURORA was not a shipment, but a transfer of personnel and knowledge. A 1978 exposé by the BBC's Horizon team attempted to track U-977B's route using magnetic anomaly detection, but found nothing except a patch of sea north of Tromsø where compasses failed to stabilize. The Norwegian Maritime Agency later classified that sector as hazardous for navigation due to abnormal interference. The only surviving eyewitness linked to the operation, former Kriegsmarine radio officer Hans Bremer, gave a sworn statement to the West German Bundesarchiv in 1981. He claimed to have served aboard Brücke 4 as communications assistant and described how the convoy travelled under absolute radio silence, navigating by pre-recorded magnetic headings. According to Bremer, one of the crates aboard the ship emitted a continuous hum audible through the hull. On the night of May 1st, near the Arctic Circle, U-977B surfaced briefly for coordination, and then, as Bremer testified, there was a flash beneath the sea, like lightning from the depths. The U-boat disappeared from sonar within seconds. Bremer's own ship was ordered to reverse course. Within 24 hours, Brücke de la Font was intercepted and scuttled by Allied patrols off Bergen. Bremer survived by chance, rescued unconscious from the water. His statements were suppressed under Allied intelligence protocols until the 1980s. In 1992, an expedition by Swedish researchers attempted to locate remnants of the convoy using side-scan sonar. They found nothing, but one anomalous metallic reflection approximately 300 meters below the surface near Jan Mayen matched the dimensions of a U-boat hull. Samples taken from surrounding sediment contained traces of tungsten carbide composites, not produced until the 1960s, suggesting contamination or later disturbance. The Norwegian Institute of Marine Research, when questioned, denied involvement in further retrieval operations. Perhaps the most unsettling piece of evidence arrived decades later. In 2007, a previously sealed British National Archives file, catalogue number ADM 23141, was released under the 60-year rule. Inside was a memo from a US naval attaché in London dated May 1946, referencing a meeting between American and British officers about containment of post-war technological anomalies. The memo includes one underlined phrase, "Operation AURORA remains unresolved. Recommend indefinite classification." Attached to it was a blurred photograph of what appeared to be a metallic sphere half buried in ice, annotated simply, "Recovered item, latitude 70.92N. As historians revisited these fragments, the pattern became evident. Something extraordinary was moved out of Germany as the Reich collapsed, something both sides sought to control, whether a prototype, a failed experiment, or merely the myth of desperate men in a dying regime. The traces of Operation AURORA lie somewhere between the Baltic and the Arctic, beneath decades of denial. The oceans keep their secrets well. Whatever vanished beneath that fog in April 1945 remains beyond recovery. a ghost convoy swallowed by time and silence, its legacy sealed within the cold margins of classified history. Chapter 2. The Ghost Station Beneath Tempelhof. When the Allied bombers stopped their nightly assaults and Berlin lay in ruins, the city's underbelly remained alive with secrets. Beneath the battered runways of its Tempelhof airport, once the pride of the Reich's aviation program, rumors spoke of a sealed substructure never shown on architectural plans. While the surface became an airlift hub and later a symbol of Cold War resilience, deep below the tarmac, a forgotten network of tunnels and chambers was entombed, marked only by cryptic symbols on wartime blueprints labeled Bereich 7b, Zugang gesperrt. Tempelhof's documented construction spanned from 1936 to 1941 under the supervision of Albert Speer's Ministry of Armaments. However, during excavation, several subcontracted engineers from the TOT organization reported anomalies, entire floor levels unaccounted for in official drafts, and underground lifts leading nowhere. The Reichsluftfahrtministerium, RLM, oversaw the site's deeper levels under a special detachment, Ahnenerbe-Abteilung E7, one of the SS's more obscure divisions, supposedly researching long-range communication through acoustic harmonics. The technology was never formally catalogued. When the Soviets stormed Berlin in May 1945, Tempelhof's runways were pockmarked with bomb craters, and most of the German military staff had already fled. In the following months, Red Army engineers discovered a sub-basement beyond the known air raid shelters. Reports archived in the Russian Ministry of Defense mention a chamber of metallic walls, coated in lead and containing several cylindrical devices arranged in circular formation. Soviet officers mistook it for an experimental radar system and began dismantling it. What happened next is recorded only in the journal of Captain Alexei Volkov, a combat engineer from the 79th Rifle Division, dated June 9, 1945. Men complain of piercing hum and pressure in ears. Lights flicker, instruments distort. We left the lower level, sealed the hatch, command ordered silence. The Soviets cordoned off the area and marked it as Technical Storage Bunker 47A. By 1946, control of Tempelhof was transferred to the US Army Air Forces. American engineers entered the complex during the Berlin airlift preparations, intending to reinforce the substructure for cargo operations. Among them was Lieutenant Robert L. Hayes, an electrical engineer who later testified under oath during a 1951 intelligence review that one chamber beneath the west taxiway emitted residual electromagnetic fields far exceeding normal readings. Hayes described discovering a metal duct fuse shut by heat and marked with an SS eagle, accompanied by the initials E7A. The Americans welded it permanently and recorded the coordinates in a sealed file labeled THF 9R Confidential. As Cold War tensions deepened, Tempelhof's airfield became central to Western operations in divided Berlin. Still, the legends of its lower levels persisted. Airmen stationed there in the 1950s told stories of faint tones that vibrated through the floor during night shifts. The US Air Force classified these as infrastructure anomalies, though an internal memorandum dated March 3, 1957, suggests a more deliberate cause. Acoustic emissions of unknown origin persist. Pattern suggests cyclical modulation rather than structural resonance. Investigate link to historic German research facility. That same year, American technicians recorded a low-frequency oscillation at 17.6 Hz, below the threshold of human hearing, but strong enough to rattle equipment. Parallel German sources began surfacing in the 1960s. During reconstruction projects in the Kreuzberg district, workers unearthed an access conduit leading toward the airfield perimeter. Berlin police sealed it immediately under instruction from US military police. The incident was later listed in West Berlin's building records as civil excavation error. Yet one civil engineer, Otto Riemann, claimed to have entered the tunnel before it was closed. In a 1972 interview, Riemann recalled seeing 3 steel vaults, all coated with white mineral residue and humming faintly as if alive. His statement was never followed up. By the early 1960s, both NATO and the Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, attempted to reopen Tempelhof's sublevels for technical surveys. The operation, codenamed for Project Hollow Star, lasted only 2 weeks before an abrupt cancellation. The official reason was excessive groundwater intrusion, though B&D internal memos refer to unexpected instrument reactions and personnel illness. Several technicians reportedly experienced migraines, nausea, and auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure in the lowest corridor. The section was resealed and its coordinates removed from engineering blueprints. During the declassification surge of the late 1990s, fragments of wartime Anomaly documentation surfaced in Polish archives, including correspondences between SS scientist Dr. Hans Ritter and Luftwaffe engineer Kurt Ulrich. One letter, dated January 1945, mentions phase synchronization experiments involving carrier tones capable of resonance through masonry. Ritter proposed using these tones to transmit encrypted messages without wires, a form of resonance communication. It is unclear if such experiments ever succeeded. Another document contained the phrase Project Klangbrücke, sound bridge, followed by a chilling line. Subjective responses in test group 12 indicate emotional disruption and loss of equilibrium after 3 cycles. Even decades later, inexplicable events continue to cluster around the site. In 1989, during the final years of divided Berlin, East German Stasi surveillance logs noted a continuous subterranean vibration detected along the border zone near Tempelhof. Seismic instruments recorded rhythmic pulses inconsistent with traffic or construction. When questioned, Soviet liaison officers dismissed the readings as equipment malfunction, yet the pattern matched data recorded in the 1950s by the Americans. The phenomenon ceased abruptly on November 9, 1989, the same day the Berlin Wall fell. Following Tempelhof's closure in 2008, a group of urban explorers reportedly accessed the sealed tunnels through a storm drain beneath Columbia Dam. Their footage, uploaded briefly to an underground web forum, showed narrow corridors lined with ceramic insulators and decayed copper coils. One frame captured a rusted plaque bearing the inscription Versuchsanlage E7. Within 48 hours, the footage was deleted and the account that posted it disappeared. German authorities later denied any breach occurred. In 2013, archivists digitizing declassified US Air Force records found a fragment of an operations report mislabeled under meteorological surveys. It contained photographs taken during the 1951 Tempelhof excavation. Dimly lit rooms filled with stacked cylindrical apparatus, each roughly 1 meter high, arranged in concentric rings. The caption beneath read, "Acoustic array, non-functional. Relocated to Wright-Patterson AFB for analysis." The shipping manifest for those items remains missing. Today, the official stance of the German government is that no secret installations exist beneath Tempelhof. Yet a handful of researchers, cross-referencing Soviet and Allied data, suggest otherwise. They propose that Anomaly Division E7 was experimenting with resonant frequencies capable of influencing neurological responses, an early form of psychological warfare technology. The acoustic transmission may have been an attempt to project commands or signals directly into the human auditory cortex without traditional equipment. The environmental illness experienced by personnel decades later might have been the lingering echo of these unfinished experiments. During a 2021 maintenance survey, workers discovered faint structural vibrations beneath Hangar 2, coinciding precisely with the location of the sealed Bunker 47A. Instruments registered intermittent low-frequency bursts, still hovering near 17 Hz, the same frequency recorded over 60 years earlier. The equipment was tested and found functional. No further investigation followed. The chamber remains sealed, the vibrations unexplained. In the archives of the Bundeswehr, the classification Bunker 47A persists, unchanged since the end of the war. Its final annotation reads, "Experiments incomplete, effects unknown." And so, beneath the polished museum floors of modern Tempelhof, the last heartbeat of the Third Reich's acoustic research still murmurs faintly in the darkness, beyond human comprehension, waiting for a door that must never be opened. Chapter 3. The Siberian Echo Project. In the winter of 1948, a Soviet train departed from the captured German research site of Peenemünde carrying crates marked only with the letters EW, the. Official records stated electronic warfare equipment, but internal. NKVD memos identified the cargo as German. acoustic and electromagnetic apparatus of scientific potential. Its destination, Arzamas, 16. The Soviet Union's most restricted scientific settlement, nestled deep within the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast. Here, under total isolation, the USSR began an operation that would later be known only by its code name, Project Echo. The Soviet leadership's obsession with German technology had begun immediately after Berlin's fall, but Project Echo was different. It did not concern rocketry or jet propulsion, but the manipulation of sound itself as a weapon. According to fragments from declassified archives in the 1990s, the directive came from the highest levels of the NKVD's Technical Directorate to explore low-frequency waveforms capable of inducing behavioral paralysis, fear, or compliance. The foundation of the research was drawn from seized Anomaly files labeled Klangversuch Reihe 7, documenting wartime experiments on psychological harmonics. The lead engineer of Project Echo was Major Anatoly Grigoriev, a radiophysicist recruited from the Leningrad Polytechnic Institute. Grigoriev's notebooks, recovered decades later from his abandoned dacha, describe early tests involving modified German U-boat sonar arrays, repurposed for atmospheric resonance transmission. The first experiments, conducted in 1949 near Lake Onega, reportedly caused radio blackout across a 50-kilometer radius. Witnesses described a pressure in the skull and temporary disorientation among test personnel. By 1951, the project had relocated to a more remote facility in Siberia, coordinates classified even to other Soviet departments, code-named Base D6. It consisted of a single communications dome, several underground bunkers, and living quarters for approximately 40 staff. According to intercepted US intelligence summaries later declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, the structure was disguised as a meteorological station operated by the Ministry of Geophysical Research. Yet satellite imagery from the early 1960s revealed the installation was surrounded by reinforced fencing, guard towers, and radar dishes never used for weather studies. Declassified. Soviet personnel rosters from the Ministry of Medium Machine. Building confirmed the presence of several German scientists among the base's initial complement, including a Dr. Friedrich Meyer, once attached to the Peenemünde Signal Division. Meyer's correspondence, intercepted in 1952 by British GCHQ, references phase modulator, type 4, capable of stimulating cortical response at distance. The phrase cortical response caught the attention of Western analysts, who assumed it referred to experimental mind control research. Experiments intensified between 1952 and 1954 under the internal code Operation Rodina. Documents from this period, preserved in fragments within the KGB Technical Bureau F-82 Points, describe testing on human subjects, mostly political prisoners from Vorkuta. The apparatus used two primary components: a power generator adapted from U-boat sonar systems and a field emitter constructed from German capacitive coils. When activated, the device produced a low-frequency oscillation between 6 and 8 Hz. In several documented cases, subjects exposed to the field experienced nausea, hallucinations, or extreme emotional distress. One log entry, dated November 18, 1953, reads simply, "Subject number 14 ceased movement. Respiratory failure after 3 minutes. Resonance maintained constant." Western intelligence first became aware of Project Echo in 1954, when a CIA listening post in Finland, operating under Operation Silverpine, intercepted rhythmic radio pulses emanating from deep Siberia. The signals repeated at intervals consistent with German submarine transmission protocols from the Second World War, though their source was hundreds of miles inland. The CIA initially assumed they were coded communications. However, acoustic analysis showed the pulses matched infrasonic frequencies, sound waves below the human hearing threshold, modulated at precise intervals. The signal pattern was identical to those found in Anomaly research. By 1957, rumors within the Soviet scientific community hinted at mass illness among workers at base. D6, an internal investigation led by Colonel Boris Voroshilov of the NKVD, reported psychological breakdown and catatonic states in over a third of the staff. Equipment failures multiplied. In one account, technicians described an incident during calibration when the generator overloaded and emitted a prolonged tone lasting 9 minutes. When power was restored, 2 guards were found unconscious and all recording instruments had ceased functioning. The event was classified Catastrophic Resonance Type 4. Shortly afterward, Project Echo was officially terminated. Unofficially, work continued under a new title, Program Mirror, at reduced scale, focusing on field containment safety. When Stalin died in 1953, and Beria was executed later that year, many classified programs underwent restructuring, yet Echo persisted, buried beneath bureaucratic renaming and misdirection. In 1959, the last surviving German consultant, Dr. Meyer, attempted to defect through the Finnish border. He was captured near Kuusamo, carrying a small notebook wrapped in wax paper. The contents, later analyzed by Western intelligence, contained sketches of concentric antennas, surrounding human silhouettes and annotations such as Alpha, entrainment achieved. Meyer died under interrogation. 2 weeks later, Soviet secrecy held firm until 1962, when seismic monitoring stations across Siberia detected a recurring low frequency event originating near the abandoned coordinates of Base D6. Civilian seismologists described it as a ground hum, repeating every 4 hours for 3 consecutive days. The phenomenon ceased abruptly after a military convoy was observed moving toward the region. Within a month, the area was erased from official maps. The first outsider to reach the site was not a soldier, but a geophysicist. In 1984, Dr. Pyotr Sokolov, a Soviet academic researching magnetic anomalies, conducted an unsanctioned expedition to the supposed D6 location. His notes, smuggled out after the USSR's collapse, described discovering half-buried metal domes, corroded wiring, and air vents sealed by concrete. Sokolov measured faint but continuous electromagnetic emissions fluctuating between 6.8 and 7.0 MHz, the same frequency band intercepted decades earlier by the CIA. He concluded the site's generators were still active underground, powered by autonomous systems. His last entry reads, "Interference affects compass. Hearing low oscillation. Heart palpitations increase with proximity." Sokolov vanished during that expedition. Only his assistant's torn journal survived, retrieved from a local forestry station. It mentioned a sound under the earth, rhythmic like breath. After that, the region was restricted again under environmental pretext. In 1998, following limited Russian declassification, journalists from Kommersant accessed portions of the defunct KGB archives referencing Experiment E12, which matched Echo's timeline. Among the papers was a 1958 memorandum acknowledging successful resonance, transfer in confined environment, but warning of unintended, cumulative neural effects. The document was signed by a colonel in the Ministry of Internal Security whose name remains redacted. Modern Russian amateur radio. Operators occasionally report strange transmissions near Isen, E-mouse, repeating in 3-pulse sequences during winter months. The source appears to originate near the same coordinates once occupied by Base D6. Attempts to triangulate the signal result in magnetic interference and equipment shutdowns. Older operators call it the Whisperer. Whether the project was a precursor to psychological warfare technology or simply a failed scientific curiosity, the records remain incomplete. Soviet documents suggest that the system was meant to project command frequencies directly to the subconscious layer. Western analysts later compared these studies to CIA's MK Ultra program. Begun years later, some believe the two efforts may have shared common scientific ancestry, both seeded from captured Nazi data. The Siberian wilderness has long since swallowed Base D6. Forests have grown over the concrete bunkers, and satellite imagery shows nothing but irregular snowdrifts. Yet, during long winter nights, shortwave listeners still speak of a pulse that drifts across the radio bands like an echo from the past. 3 slow beats, then silence. Every year, between January and March, it returns, steady and cold, as if the dead circuits of a forgotten experiment still call out from beneath the permafrost. For those who have heard it, the sensation is always the same. A low vibration felt not in the ear, but in the bones, carrying with it the ghost of a sound the world was never meant to hear. Chapter 4. The Vatican File, Operation Damascus. In the spring of 1945, as the Allied armies closed their grip around the remnants of the Third Reich, the Vatican's vast network of diplomatic envoys and intelligence operatives quietly began a separate campaign. It was not an evacuation of civilians, nor a rescue of the faithful. It was Operation Damascus, an ecclesiastical mission cloaked beneath humanitarian relief. yet orchestrated through the Servizio Informazioni Ecclesiastico, the Vatican's secret wartime intelligence branch. Few in Rome even knew it existed. Its purpose, to recover and conceal Axis scientists and intelligence personnel before the Allied occupation could reach them, under the pretext of ecclesiastical asylum. Documents recovered decades later in the Archivio Segreto Vaticano reveal that Operation Damascus was authorized in February 1945 by Monsignor Giovanni Battista Montini, then the Vatican's substitute for ordinary affairs. A coded letter addressed to Archbishop Alois Hudal of the Collegio Teutonico di Santa Maria dell'Anima instructs, protect the carriers of the flame. Their knowledge must not fall to Babylon. The carriers referred to a select group of Nazi and Italian scientists linked to neurological and chemical interrogation programs, research that both the Allies and Soviets were racing to seize. The Vatican's network stretched from Rome to Barcelona, with logistical assistance from the Franciscan Order's Commissariato Generale di Terra Santa. Monasteries in Genoa, Milan and Salzburg served as temporary safe houses. Beneath the chapel of San Giorgio in Portofino, a small crypt was converted into a document repository. It was there, in late April 1945, that the first microfilm reels arrived, hidden inside hollowed-out crucifixes, each labelled with a Latin psalm number. British intelligence, monitoring the Swiss border at the time, intercepted a Vatican courier carrying 2 such artifacts, but never decoded their contents. A decrypted British signal from May 1945, preserved in the National Archives under file HS9-340, notes, microfilms contain medical logs from occupied Poland, possible relevance to human conditioning trials, forward to SIS, classified Vatican route. After Germany's surrender, Allied command suspected that the Vatican was sheltering individuals under false clerical identities. Among them was Dr. Erich Taubner, a neurologist from Breslau involved in rehabilitative research on combat trauma, a euphemism for psychological conditioning of prisoners. Taubner's name later appeared on Argentine immigration records under the alias Father Enrique Taube, listed as a missionary arriving in Buenos Aires in 1947. That same year, an Argentine intelligence brief reported contact between European clergy envoys and former members of the Quartet Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. Both Taubner and a second figure, one Father Victor Hess, believed to be SS Hauptsturmführer Victor Hesse, received Vatican-issued travel documents through the Pontificia Commissione di Assistenza. Operation Damascus was not a rogue effort. It operated through channels overlapping with the GLACIER line, the post-war escape network managed by Catholic clergy to smuggle fugitives from Europe to South America. However, Damascus differed in its selection criteria. Its evacuees were not generals or ideologues, but scientists, cryptographers, and interrogators, assets deemed too dangerous to fall into Bolshevik hands. In one Vatican memorandum dated September 14, 1946, Cardinal Eugène Tisserand wrote, "Better the shepherd's crook guide these wolves than the red hand of Moscow." An American intelligence report compiled in 1948 by the OSS successor, the CIA, corroborated the existence of Damascus, codenamed Project Shepherd. The report identified a series of ecclesiastical relocations involving former German nationals who reappeared under clerical identities across Latin America. The report's appendix contains a disturbing annotation. Subject Taube reported collaboration with Argentine medical officers in psychological reconditioning of prisoners, believed continuation of wartime studies. When the document was later declassified, 2 pages were redacted entirely under the section header, Neurological Application, Non-Lethal Evidence, suggests that several Damascus evacuees were integrated into US and British research programs under alternate identities. One such case involved a chemist, Dr. Otto Schenk, transferred from Italy to Spain via Vatican channels before being absorbed into Britain's Porton Down facility in 1948. His original SS service record vanished from both German and Allied archives, though payroll records from the Vatican Secretariat of State show disbursements to Brother Oswin matching his timeline. Not all within the Church agreed with these actions. Bishop Luigi Maglione's personal diary, recovered from the Apostolic Library, contains a chilling entry dated August 1945. They call it mercy, but it is barter, souls for knowledge. Even in silence, the walls know. Soon after that, Maglione died under what Vatican physicians described as sudden cardiac failure. In 1950, the Vatican formally dissolved the Servizio Informazioni Ecclesiastico, and all materials relating to Damascus were sealed under the authority of the Secretariat of State. That same year, Pope Pius V issued an encyclical emphasizing forgiveness and reconciliation among all who once strayed. To most historians, it appeared as a call for post-war healing. To those aware of the Damascus network, it sounded like the closing benediction of an operation complete. Yet the trail did not end in Rome. In 1997, a partial ledger surfaced in the personal collection of Father Alberto Oreglia, a Jesuit historian who had been granted limited access to Vatican wartime files. The ledger, marked Transitus Ecclesiastici Privati 1945-1947 Nile, contained a list of 52 names categorized under Relocation Priority 1. Among them, Erich Taubner, Victor Hesse, Otto Schenk, and an unidentified entry simply marked R9. At the bottom of the final page, a Latin annotation read, Pastor novit quid grex oblivici debet. Translated, the shepherd knows what the flock must forget. After the Cold War, the Vatican cooperated with limited declassification requests, but denied the existence of any intelligence operation matching Damascus. However, archival inconsistencies persisted. Several microfilm references from 1945 corresponded to gaps in Allied documentation concerning chemical interrogation research conducted in Poland's Lublin district, specifically the facility at Majdanek, where German medical units reportedly carried out neurological interference trials. These files vanished from both Polish and Soviet archives after the war. Some historians now suspect the Vatican microfilms contained this data, smuggled westward to prevent its use in Soviet research. In 2002, Italian investigative journalist Marco Bianchi published Il Codice Damasceno, compiling interviews with retired Vatican officials. One testimony, attributed to an unnamed former archivist, stated, "They came to Rome not for forgiveness, but for cover. The Church feared the Russians would claim dominion over the mind through science, so we gave sanctuary to those who could prevent it. We traded sin for secrecy." Today, within the Vatican's classified repository, the Archivum Apostolicum Secretum, Room 14th, access logs confirm that a restricted file labeled Damascus was opened only 3 times since 1950, each time by direct papal authorization. Its contents remain sealed. The Church has neither denied nor confirmed its existence. From the outside, the Vatican's marble halls echo with prayer and ceremony. Yet beneath them, hidden among the dust of forbidden ledgers, lingers the shadow of a moral compromise born in the chaos of war. Whether the Church acted to preserve humanity's conscience or to secure its own influence remains unknown. But among the few who have glimpsed the surviving records, one phrase is said to appear again and again, handwritten in fading ink beside the names of men who vanished into clerical robes and new lives. Absolutio data. Opus consummatum. Absolution given. The work is complete. Chapter 5. Operation Glacier and the Alpine Anomaly. In the spring of 1947, an unexpected thaw in the Swiss Alps revealed something beneath the ancient ice that should not have been there. Climbers on the Aletsch Glacier stumbled upon the tail section of a downed aircraft half submerged in blue ice, its markings almost erased. Local police initially assumed it was a wartime transport, one of the many lost during the chaos of 1945. But when Swiss authorities recovered fragments of the fuselage and saw the strange, unmarked insignia, neither Luftwaffe nor civilian, they contacted the US Army Intelligence Liaison in Bern. Within 48 hours, the site was sealed, and an operation began under the cryptic title, Operation Glacier. The official story given to the Swiss press was that an American supply plane from 1944 had been recovered for repatriation. In truth, the wreck was identified as a Archie den Junkers Jew 290Pu, a long-range aircraft known for transporting sensitive cargo during the Reich's final months. What made this one unique was that its serial number had been deliberately filed off, and its cargo bay was welded shut from the inside. Aboard were 6 rectangular containers made of steel alloy, their surfaces bearing faint traces of the Abteilung 7R insignia, the Reich Main Security Officers Division responsible for cultural and esoteric artifacts. The crates were transported to a US facility in Germany under armed escort and later flown to Wright-Patterson Field in Ohio. Then the Nerve Center for Foreign Technology Assessment. Declassified records released under the US Freedom of Information Act in 1997 include a brief summary of the recovery. Dated June 2, 1947, it reads, "Material exhibits non-standard metallurgy. Recommend category alpha analysis. Radiation levels within tolerance." Yet the attached field notes from the recovery team tell a more unnerving story. Lieutenant Harold R. Jennings, the operations technical officer, recorded in his journal, "Readings inconsistent with known alloys. Instruments respond to presence of containers with slight electromagnetic deviation. Personnel report headaches and unease." To this day, no one can explain how a heavy aircraft like the Ju-290 ended up deep within the glacier. The terrain was far beyond the range of any known wartime flight path, and no record of its departure exists in Luftwaffe logs. Some post-war analysts believe it was part of a desperate evacuation convoy fleeing Bavaria in April 1945, carrying cargo from the SS research centers in Prague or Kassel. Others point to its cargo as evidence of Reichsflugscheiben, rumored aero-disc research, but no documentation supports that claim. The more plausible theory links the operation to the SAI Sonderauftrag Alpine files, known to have handled non-combative strategic materials. US military engineers who opened the crates in late 1947 described the contents as metallic components, partially assembled, showing advanced machining. One engineer, writing anonymously to his former commanding officer, stated, "It appears to be a field generator, perhaps experimental, bearing design similarities to Allied radar, but with reversed polarity circuits." The crates were reclassified under Project Sign, the Air Force's early investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena. It is likely this connection was what permanently buried the case in secrecy. Swiss mountaineer Hans Widmer, one of the first civilians to reach the site before it was closed, left behind a memoir years later, self-published in Zurich in 1965. He recalled seeing soldiers in US uniforms unloading metal boxes glowing faintly in the sunlight, and overhearing an officer order, "Do not touch it directly." His account was dismissed as delusional, but later declassified photographs of the recovery operation show personnel wearing improvised lead-lined gloves, despite the US Army's claim that no radiological hazard was present. By 1950, the glacier had shifted, covering the original site once more. Operation Glacier remained a classified entry under the Air Materiel Command's Special Projects section. The surviving paperwork indicates that the 6 crates were split, 2 sent to Wright-Patterson, 2 to Los Alamos, and 2 to an unnamed facility in Nevada. The final disposition of all items remains unaccounted for. In 1963, a Swiss scientific expedition studying glacial movement near the same coordinates recorded strange readings from a magnetometer array. The data showed a sustained magnetic field oscillation within the ice, fluctuating every 6.4 seconds. At the time, it was attributed to buried metal debris, but when the team revisited the site in 1971, the field had moved uphill, contrary to glacial flow. One of the scientists, Dr. Emil Hafner, noted in his logbook, "Metal moving against time, impossible." He was later recruited by NATO's scientific committee, though his papers on the anomaly were never published. The only consistent clue across all investigations was a recurring reference in US internal communications. Material origin inconsistent with known metallurgy. See Prague archives. These Prague archives likely referred to the Rijksuniversiteit Prague, where late-war research under SS supervision experimented with exotic composites and piezoelectric materials derived from captured Czech crystal industries. The archives were seized by Soviet forces in 1945 and have never been released. In 1989, Swiss environmental authorities, responding to increased melting near Aletsch, rediscovered small fragments of the wreckage. The metal displayed no corrosion, even after decades beneath ice. Tests conducted at ETH Zurich revealed a composition of 70% aluminum, 20% tungsten, and trace elements of niobium, an alloy unknown in the 1940s. Samples sent for independent verification were confiscated by Swiss federal police, citing international security agreements. A 2009 article in Neue Zürcher Zeitung referenced a mysterious file obtained from the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. The document, marked K347 Glacier 1947, contains a typed statement from a US liaison officer dated July 12, 1947. Recovered technology demonstrates non-terrestrial isotopic distribution. Recommend continued concealment to avoid public misinterpretation. The US Embassy in Bern refused comment when contacted. Today, the coordinates of the wreck remain officially lost. The glacier's surface has shifted by kilometers since the recovery, erasing all traces. However, periodic aerial surveys continue to show a localized thermal anomaly, slightly warmer than surrounding ice, directly above where the Ju-290 once lay. The Swiss authorities attribute it to geothermal activity, though the Alps are geologically stable in that region. Witnesses from the original recovery have long since passed, but their families retain fragments, letters, faded photographs, and occasional sketches of hexagonal machinery, or panels with embossed runes mistaken for serial codes. In one of Lieutenant Jennings's final journal entries, he wrote, "There was something inside one of the containers that vibrated faintly when touched, like a heart." Operation Glacier remains one of the least discussed post-war retrievals in Allied intelligence history, overshadowed by the more publicized efforts of Operation Paperclip. Yet in the classified corridors of both American and Swiss defense agencies, it endures as a point of quiet tension, proof that the end of the war did not end the mystery of its technology. What the Nazis were transporting through the Alps during their final days, whether stolen research, stolen relics, or something neither human nor divine, was buried beneath layers of ice and silence. And though the glacier continues to melt, revealing traces of the past year by year, no one dares reopen the sealed truth of 1947. The cold, it seems, was the safest vault humanity could ever build. The echoes of that silence still travel through time, buried in declassified fragments and whispers between diplomats who claim to remember nothing. What was taken from the world in those final days did not disappear. It adapted, it waited, reshaping itself into rumor and denial. Every recovered scrap, every erased signature, feels like the faint pulse of something that refuses to rest. Perhaps the war never truly ended. It merely changed its battlefield, from trenches and skies to the fragile vaults of memory and truth. We chase these ghosts not to prove they existed, but to understand the cost of pretending they didn't. Because in the end, the most dangerous secrets are not the ones buried in ice or locked behind steel, but the ones written into history itself, in ink that refuses to fade.